Good afternoon. On behalf of the Association of Justice and Treatment Professionals, and on my own behalf, welcome to the first session in the 2024 Speaker Series. We begin this session by acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. And as settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years, long before today as we gather here. There have been Aboriginal peoples who have been stewards of this land. I am speaking to you from Brampton, and in particular, I acknowledge the Ashinobik, the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe, and Chippewa peoples, and the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this land. We also recognize the contributions of the Métis, Inuit, and other indigenous people, the contributions they have made both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous people must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular to bring justice for the lives lost in residential schools, as well as all the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country. Today's topic is practical strategies for supporting individuals with acute brain injury in the justice system, a case study approach. We are very fortunate today to have two experts to speak to us. Alice Heidinger is a behavior therapist who has been working in the field for almost 20 years at a community-based acute brain injury organization, Dale Brain Injury Services. She has an undergraduate honors degree in kinesiology, a certificate in applied behavior analysis, and is a certified brain injury specialist with the Brain Injury Association of America. Karen Taylor is a behavior therapist who has been working in the field for 20 years at a community-based acquired brain injury organization. She has an undergraduate degree in psychology, a diploma in behavioral science technology, and is a certified brain injury specialist with the Brain Injury Association of America. Karen and Alison, thank you very much for being prepared to share your expertise. We have a Q&A. I encourage everyone to engage with us using the Q&A. Feel free to send your questions into the Q&A, and at the end of the presentation, Karen and Alison will begin answering your questions. So with that, I turn it over to our esteemed speakers for today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We are excited to be here and share some information with you today. Yeah, we're just opening up our presentation here for you, and we'll get started. So one of the main reasons why we wanted to connect with everyone today is, as I'm sure some of you are aware, that there's a high prevalence of acquired brain injury or traumatic brain injury in the justice system. And the percentage ranges. It ranges from the low end of 40 to 50% to anywhere up to around 90%. And the reason why the range is so varied in some of the research that's out there, it's because a lot of brain injuries go undiagnosed. A lot of people are, afraid to come forward, especially if they're, doing something they probably shouldn't be doing. And a lot of things, I hit to the head, I don't worry about it, I don't need to go seek treatment. So there's a lot of reasons why people don't always get diagnosed with a brain injury. Therefore, because the prevalence is so high, it is very likely that you're going to come across a few as you're working. And whether it's in the court systems, in the jail prison system, lawyers, or all the other supports networks that are out there supporting people, you're likely going to come across a few that have an acquired brain injury. And another important reason is that the rate of recidivism is very high too amongst brain injury because of their cognitive challenges and their difficulties learning. They often make mistakes and can't always learn from those. So some of the objectives that we have here today, our goal is just to share some basic information about brain injuries, what it is, common challenges and strategies, how you might be able to implement some of the strategies we talked about in your day-to-day work with the individuals with brain injury. So let's get down to some basics. How do we sustain a brain injury? Where there's three primary ways there. So in the kind of yellow orangey box is the non-traumatic brain injury. And that's basically internal damage that goes on. So like strokes, tumors, infections, those are the more naturally occurring injuries. Then we have your traumatic, and it's like a bluish kind of color. Your traumatic brain injury, where you have an actual contact. So where the head is struck against an object, and you can have a closed non-penetrating injury or an open penetrating injury. And again, it's exactly what it sounds like. Falls, assault, sports injuries, stabbing, gunshots. Those are the kind of injuries that you see there. Car accidents. And then your non-contact traumatic brain injuries in green. This is where you see a lot of rotational angular force. So your head doesn't come in contact with something solid, but yet you get thrusted forward, brain gets thrusted forward or sideways, and you have that twisting and turning that breaks the brain cells, damages the brain cells and the neurons, and therefore, brain injury. And again, like falls in the States, a lot of blasts, working in the military, motor vehicle accidents, sports injuries are some of the causes there. So this is just a lovely picture of the main structures, some of the structures of the brain. And again, this is just high level, just a quick view. But the brain is a very integrated, complex networks. Many functions require multiple areas of the brain to work together to produce a response. For example, asking somebody what they ate for dinner last night requires the brain to work together to be able to generate that response. To answer, you have to use your working memory to remember the question. You have to use your hearing, comprehension of what's being asked, memory recall, information processing, organizing your thoughts. So a lot of work goes into answering that simple question that takes us seconds to be able to answer. Somebody with a brain injury, it's going to take them a little bit of time potentially to answer that. And that's a relatively easy question. So for more difficult questions, you can expect that their time to process and generate a response is going to take a longer period of time. I've seen some people where it takes minutes, some people where it takes days, and other people it's, a week later that they come back to me like, hey, Karen, remember when you were talking about blah, blah, blah? So sometimes processing can take up to a couple of days. So just keep that in mind. I also wanted to highlight the frontal lobe there. It is, as you can see, one of the largest areas of the brain. So kind of unfortunately tends to sustain more of the damage than some of the other areas. And the frontal lobe, most often, this is where we see a lot of the difficulties with our clients. And what I would expect that you would also see a lot of difficulties with your clients as well. It's responsible for our higher executive cognitive function. So We're looking at planning, sequencing, organizing, reasoning, judgment, problem solving, memory, your personality changes, personality here, emotional and behavioral regulation, and speech, as well as some motor control. So to go about our day-to-day life and business, our frontal lobe has a lot to do with that. So this is where we see a lot of our challenges. And keep in mind that the brain, again, is a very integrated network. So even though we've highlighted on the screen there where certain areas are controlled by certain areas of the brain, it very much is all integrated and works together. Let's talk about some common challenges. So these are some common things that you're likely to see. So physical, often, especially with concussions and mild brain injuries, you do see a lot of fatigue. So with fatigue, you can have mental fatigue, cognitive, physical, and emotional fatigue. And it really does impact your ability to think clearly, concentrate, being able to regulate your emotions, being able to get started and complete a task, the difficulties of getting out of bed or getting off the couch, difficulties even with communicating. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever had a really difficult night's sleep and then the next day tried to function. Sometimes it's a little more challenging. So some of our clients deal with fatigue on an ongoing basis, and they really do struggle with some of these basic things. Another one is pain. So quite often people experiencing a lot of physical pain as well as emotional pain from the trauma that they've been through regarding their brain injury. And of course, we know pain does impact our ability to sleep and think and our mood. So it's important to keep pain in mind too when working with our clients. Light and sound sensitivity. So quite often we will dim the lights, we'll encourage people to wear sunglasses, things like that, because the light and noise are quite overwhelming, causes pain, headaches, etc. Motor functioning. So depending on the type of injury, you can see a lot of different motor functioning challenges. Some people may need to be in a wheelchair, some people are paralyzed. So it really depends on the severity of their injury. But for some people with maybe a little more mild motor functioning impairment, you might see that sometimes they might come across as intoxicated. So they have difficulties with slurred speech, word finding. Their balance might be a little bit off, so a little bit of staggering or unsteady gait, dragging their feet, jerky movements. So these are other things to keep in mind. They're not necessarily always misbehaving. It could be just their simple motor functioning doesn't allow them to do smooth muscle movements. Cognitive challenges, here we have memory. And again, that could be long-term or short-term memory. Information processing, kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. So just understanding the information sometimes takes a while to go through all the necessary circuits to register and process and come up with a response. Problem solving, that's being able to identify the problem, coming up with a reasonable and realistic solution, and sometimes even just asking for help is difficult as well. So quite often we will do problem solving training to help our clients. Insight and awareness. This is another very common one in which people are not aware of their challenges. They're not aware of their strengths. They're not aware of their limitations. They don't recognize how their actions and their comments impact others. They're just not able to make that connection. Reasoning, judgment, decision-making. Again, quite often, their ability to make sound decisions and judgments is off. They're not able to learn from their mistakes. Sometimes they're not a very good judge of character. They can be very vulnerable to others that try to take advantage of them. Again, because they're not able to pick up on social cues. They're not able to make sound decisions because of all the different cognitive challenges that they have, as well as the cognitive challenges around decision-making and judgment in itself. So here we have some emotional and behavioral common challenges. Impulsivity is probably going to be up there, one of the top ones. So this is quick to act, quick to speak before thinking about it. So this is just, whatever comes to their thoughts, they either do or say without really, again, thinking about what the outcome of that thought or action might cause them. Initiation and motivation is another huge one in the sense that often people get mislabeled as being lazy, when in fact their ability to initiate a particular activity is impaired. So it's the lack of the internal drive to start an activity or a task. And with motivation, it's the desire or wanting to do the task or activity. I know it's good for me, but I just can't do it. There's somebody knocking on my door to give me some food, but I just don't have the ability to get up off the couch right now and go answer the door. So that get up and go is impaired. Emotional regulation. Our emotions are up and down, they're extreme, they're not in line with a response. So sometimes, when you've told somebody that somebody has passed away, you might get a laugh or a giggle instead of maybe a different type of reaction. Not all the time the responses are in line with what is going on. Social norms. This is another one that often people have difficulties following social cues and social norms. They can be socially awkward, make inappropriate comments and jokes at inappropriate times. They just seem very out of place and awkward. And again, it's not because of their fault. It happens to be part of the inability to pick up those social cues and follow the social norms that we follow day to day. And of course, we get a lot of grief and loss because a lot of people after a brain injury recognize that, hey, I used to be married, I used to have a job, I had a family, I was good at sports, I had all these wonderful things going on, and now I don't have those things. So of course, there's going to be a lot of grief and loss going along with that. And with that grief and loss people tend to experience a lot of depression and anxiety and even anger along with that as well. And also with the brain injury itself, there can be a lot of chemical changes, which also produces an increased risk of depression and anxiety. And then they have difficulties coping with day-to-day adversity because we have difficulties regulating our emotions. So we may overreact to different things. And like I said, our cognitive challenges are impaired, so being able to make good decisions and process things the way that you and I necessarily would comes a lot more difficult if they're dealing with fatigue and pain. All these lead to difficulties coping in their day-to-day.
So in order to support people with memory, attention, and concentration challenges, there's a couple of things that we can do. We've outlined some here. Presenting information in small chunks, so keeping things as simple as possible and short as possible. Repeating information or rephrasing if you need to. Writing things down. So this could be having them write something down or you writing it down for them if they're not able. Some things you might want to write down are like tasks that they need to complete before you see them next, or action items that they need to look into, or perhaps a next appointment or a next appearance in court. Having things written down makes it more likely that they're going to follow through. When you're actually meeting with them, you want to make sure that you minimize the distractions in the environment. For example, if you're in an office, you might want to reduce the lighting if they're light sensitive, turn off music. Perhaps there's a TV or something if it's in a waiting area. And then if there's crowds, maybe move to a different area. This will help with the second point, which is to make sure that you have their attention before speaking. We also want to make sure that we ask the person we're talking to who has a brain injury to summarize their understanding before continuing on with the conversation. For example, if there are bail conditions, do they understand what those bail conditions are and how they're going to follow through? Is it written in legal language or is it in layman's terms? And can you provide a little bit more clarification? Also, providing concrete information is imperative. Typically, people with acquired brain injury do much better with concrete information as opposed to very abstract concepts. So if you want them to check in with police as a result of bail conditions, you might say, rather than you'll just need to check in with police once a week, you might say, on Fridays at 1 p.m., you need to check in with police and talk to this particular sergeant. Encourage structure and routine as much as possible. And when you are able, it's helpful if you have appointments at the same day, same time of the day, same day of the week, and even the same location if you can. In addition, using assistive devices that are going to work for the person you're serving. I know that not everybody has a cell phone, but if they do, perhaps cell phone applications can work, or alarms on a cell phone or a wristwatch or a notebook. Sometimes just having something that they are most familiar with can help them to be more successful. And then the last one that I'll highlight is promoting visual reminders. So encouraging them to use Post-it notes or an actual wall calendar, or having signs posted wherever they're staying, whether that's reminders to lock the door or turn off the stove or attend an appointment, just having things in front and center in front of them. If we're supporting someone with communication challenges, it's important to remember that we speak slowly, clearly, and express and stress the important words, emphasizing the most important concepts. We want to, when we can, ask very specific yes or no questions. For example, are you on ODSP, rather than where does your money come from, or what is your income source? Other options similar, it would be to provide choices rather than if you have to ask what is your income, perhaps you could give them the choices. Are you on ODSP or on CPP? Or we worked with some individuals in long-term care where the individuals are offered, would you like beef or pork for lunch? And that helps them to choose something rather than having to come up with an idea. Using gestures and objects to help articulate information, so clarifying things by drawing or writing down information. And I actually like this one, avoiding abstract concepts, idioms, or cultural references. You and I might say, like, you're on fire, but they might not be able to catch on that what you're actually saying is that they're doing a really good job, but actually express praise directly, like, you are doing a good job. We also want to be as patient as we can and give people an opportunity to respond, and provide other ways to communicate, like maybe a picture board or a website or something like that. Moving along, something that you may have heard of before is planning and pacing to help people with managing fatigue and the symptoms associated with fatigue. You want to progress slowly and monitor the person that you're working with for symptoms of fatigue, which Karen outlined already. Encourage them to take breaks and rests, especially if a task or activity is particularly daunting or exhausting. Spread things throughout the week. In your particular situation, you may need to meet with them for shorter periods of time, more than once a week if you're able. And schedule appointments when you know that they're at their best. So some clients that we serve are better in the morning, some are better in the afternoon, and just doing our best to accommodate those times so that we get their best self in the moments there. And then be aware that the person you're serving may become fatigued, and be able to monitor that and recognize that their functioning will vary day to day or even hour to hour sometimes. Some other key strategies you might want to keep in mind, one is of which we have already outlined, is providing extra time for processing information. As Karen mentioned, it can take seconds, minutes, hours, days sometimes to process information. Another one I'd like to highlight is focusing on building rapport. Sometimes I think we take for granted that we will be respected and that we will be listened to, but it can be helpful to use a collaborative approach and work together with the person we're serving to accomplish things when we can. It does increase the likelihood that someone will participate if we're developing rapport and engaging in social conversation, even if it's like the first 5 minutes of a meeting, asking how their week's going, or asking for highlights from the past few days. Those kinds of things can help with engagement before diving into something more potentially stressful. Encouraging positive coping skills. This can be a number of different things. It depends on the person that we're serving. So we might encourage them to use positive self-talk, some deep breathing exercises, maybe listening to music or going for a walk. Sometimes people just need to remove themselves from a difficult situation for a few minutes or even hours to regroup. whatever is helpful for that particular individual to manage through a challenging situation. And then Karen talked a little bit about problem solving, but making sure that we're including the people that we're serving in the problem solving process. It's an opportunity for them to see the problem solving process and learn some of the skills that we want them to use more. And then, although sometimes I take for granted that people just know that they're doing a good job, I think it's important to be very sincere and positive and praise people when they've made a good next step. Sometimes they just need to hear, I know this is really hard for you, but you've really done a good job by attending your first appointment or by completing your first appointment or whatever the case might be.
So client A, let's talk a little bit about her. She's had a very difficult life, acquired her brain injury at age 11 from a car accident. She was diagnosed with epilepsy at age 17, bipolar and anxiety disorder also. She is not, she does not do well with taking her medication. She's very withdrawn, negative. She has some cognitive difficulties with her brain injury, difficulties, relationships in general, but really strained family relationship. And she was in and out of shelters and the ER. While residing at one of the shelters, she assaulted another resident, and that's at age 24, and that's how she became involved in the justice system. So here's some of her presenting challenges, and these made it very difficult for her to maintain relationships, like I said, participate in groups, day programs. She was able to come to our day program, and we tried our best to support her there. But quite often she was asked to leave due to her inappropriate interactions with others, trying to instigate conflict and aggression. So we did have to ask her to leave. But so these are some of the other challenges that she was experiencing. Light sensitivity. She always wore sunglasses. Very much difficulties coping with stress. So she did have a difficult time. So here are some of the supports we provided her while she was going through the justice system. Lots and lots of reminder phone calls and text messages. We helped her understand the nature of the charges and the outcomes, again, reviewing all the paperwork with her and having her explain it to us back in her own words, breaking the information down, going with her to some of these appointments so that we could help her break that information down. We also provided a lot of emotional supports and reassurance to her, so letting her know that she was doing a good job and that we were proud of her for showing up and attending and following through. Let's see what else. We connected her with other community resources, and yeah, just helped her along the way with the paperwork, etc. So some strategies that we did, like I mentioned, lots of encouragement to increase her confidence. So reminders of how well she's doing, letting her know that was a good decision, how proud we are of her. Strategies to focus on helping her focus on the positive, as well as changing her perspective into a more of a positive perspective. Trying to get her to participate in fun and meaningful activities. Providing strategies around memory, planning, organizing, and some of those included helping her learn the different applications on her cell phone, especially the calendar app with putting in appointments and reminders, the alarms and things like that. I think we even use the navigational app to help her get around. We also taught her a lot of coping skills, like coping strategies, learning to manage her frustration and stress. So there was a lot of deep breathing and rest breaks. And then, of course, we did a lot of life skills. So teaching her to budget, cleaning schedule, how to maintain her own apartment. So all of these have helped her to interact more effectively with others. There's less conflict and drama, more positivity, more confidence, and basically in general, just more stability. So now she's doing great. I'm happy to report she's doing fabulous. It took a while for us to get there, but she's got some friends. She takes her medication consistently. She's able to maintain her apartment on her own. She's not going to the ER anymore, not attending shelters, and there's been 0 criminal offenses or charges since the initial. So she is doing great. She's able to advocate for herself.
All right, so this is client B. When we became involved with this particular individual, he was 35 years old. He was living on again, off again with a common law partner. He had some access to his 5 children. He had a history of substance use, but we were encouraged in knowing that he had already obtained a small motors diploma from college prior to his brain injury, so we may be able to tap into that. So he sustained 2 different brain injuries. The initial one was a motor vehicle accident, and then he was incarcerated for assault charges and was actually assaulted while incarcerated. So he sustained 2 separate brain injuries during his life, which is additional brain trauma, one on top of the other. So he came to us with quite a few challenges, as you can see listed here. Some of the ones that gave him particular difficulty was the short-term memory challenges. He had really hard time remembering appointments, remembering people's names, remembering where he was going or where he needed to be. He had a lot of body pain from the original brain injury and car accident. He had some physical injuries in addition and was experiencing migraines from the brain trauma. Right. And then in terms of supports that we were able to provide to him as he was going through the court system were similar to to client A, in that we were doing a lot of phone calls and text messages just to check in, make sure that he was going to appointments he needed to be at, or that he was meeting with the rehab facilitator at the right date and time. He really benefited and actually used a lot of notebooks in the time we've worked with him, and we are still working with him now to write things down and review important details, keeping it as simple as possible in his notebook so it didn't get too complicated, writing down any questions he needed to ask, again, with emotional support and reassurance, but we also connected him with places like CMHA and Indwell. In terms of strategies that we implemented, we did a lot of check-in phone calls and text messages. Again, lots of encouragement to increase his confidence. He really didn't feel as though he was worthy of some of the supports he received. So just reminding him that he can make a change in his life and that he can improve. We encouraged him a lot to get involved in things in the community and to look for employment and to reach out to services to help him to be a better dad as well. We worked on memory and problem-solving strategies. We attended appointments because often he would be not able to remember the appointment, but if we went with him, he'd be more likely to attend. And then, similar to what we've talked about already, introduce the positive coping skills, especially deep breathing. So just like client A, client B is doing absolutely wonderful. He's currently working in fast food, and the last time I spoke with his rehab facilitator, he was on his way to pursuing management at a fast food facility in the city. He was working on getting his own apartment. He was spending a lot more time with his children, and he was actually connecting with his previous partner to create a plan for doing well with the children. He continues to attend weekly rehab sessions with one of our rehab facilitators. He still uses the agenda that we started him with right from the beginning to keep track of appointments, and he's making good use of apps on his smartphone as well. So this isn't the most fun thing to talk about, but we always like to be a little bit realistic and talk about what the possible barriers might be to someone being successful with a brain injury in the justice system or otherwise. It is unfortunate that not everyone is successful, but through our experience, we've been able to identify some of the barriers and help clients to work through them or around them. The first one is a diagnosis of brain injury in the first place. Having a medically verified brain injury is essential to be eligible for most brain injury services. You'd be surprised how many people can't find the words moderate to severe brain injury on their medical records. So getting supporting documentation can be tricky. There's also challenges with getting the right assessments or getting services without that documentation. There's limited brain injury supports to be able to assist people with these challenges. So, and there's some areas listed there. But brain injury is an invisible injury in a lot of cases, in that they look like they are very well, but they actually have significant head trauma. So they can be overlooked or dismissed as if it's something else. The availability of services is also difficult. There's limited eligibility, limited suitability, and of course, waiting lists for things. Sometimes this can be mitigated if there's a settlement or a third-party funder for the person to receive services. But there's also a limited amount of support for individuals while incarcerated and upon release from prison. It does happen on occasion that we get a referral from a detention facility, but not terribly often. And then, of course, the person's brain injury themselves. They might not be willing or able to participate in services due to the cognitive challenges that Karen outlined, like memory, initiation and motivation, or self-awareness.
So how can you help in your day-to-day? And I think it varies obviously on your position and your role, what you might be able to do and what's realistic that you might be able to do. But we thought we'd throw together some ideas in addition to the strategies that we provided. So one is being positive and promoting hope. So talking about their strengths and trying to play in on their strengths, giving them lots of positive feedback and encouragement that they can do this, that they're capable of doing it. It's their brain injury, not them as a person. They're still a smart individual. It's the brain injury that's causing memory challenges and other cognitive challenges. When people are positive and hopeful, they're more likely to engage and make happier choices. If you're not sure if they have a brain injury, you can always do some screening. There's a HELP screener that Allison will briefly touch on in a little bit. Education. So thank you for joining us today and just getting a brief overview about brain injury, but feel free to dive deeper and educate yourself a little bit further to get a better understanding of brain injury and the common challenges. And taking a non-judgmental approach. Individuals who have sustained a brain injury can struggle with following directions, remembering dates, details, recalling places, and sometimes limit mobility. We talked before that sometimes they might appear intoxicated when really they're not. They're just struggling because of how their disability is impacting them physically, and whether they're slurring their speech or dragging their feet or stumbling. So we try to tell everybody to treat each interaction as a new interaction because we don't know what's going on, and they do vary day to day depending on how they're feeling and how they're doing. Yeah, try to consider if it's the ABI that's playing a role here and not something else. Try to set realistic and achievable goals and also have realistic expectations of your interactions and what they can and cannot accomplish. Be curious, meaning ask them what's going on, what their experience has been like. Our experience is that they found it very difficult going through the justice system and they find it quite overwhelming. So just getting to know what they're struggling with might be able to help you figure out, again, what you might be able to do to support them. And it also goes a long way, that genuineness and building rapport, to again get that buy-in so that they always meet with you when they're supposed to, instead of trying to avoid us. I find sometimes our clients avoid the professionals because you don't understand, you can't possibly get it. And then, of course, try to keep it simple, meaning keep the information that you're sharing and the content that you're talking about as simple as possible. Like Allison mentioned, like short, sweet, clear, very precise. Try to keep it simple and have them paraphrase back to you so that you can understand, what it is that they're understanding. And then you have that opportunity to clarify if something is misunderstood. So what else can we do? Well, make connections. Again, other referrals to our organization, other referrals, speech, OT, PT, other community service providers are out there to help. It does take a team sometimes. Be consistent as much as possible because that is very helpful. We find that a lot of our clients thrive on structure and routine. So whenever you can build that in, that's helpful. And of course, be patient and empathetic, because sometimes it can be very stressful when they're constantly missing appointments, they're screwing information up, they're not showing. So yeah, just try to be patient and empathetic with them. And then, of course, encourage meaningful activities and fun. Whenever you can throw a couple of jokes in there and share a couple laughs, it goes a long way in accomplishing some of those difficult tasks that you have to do. And then keep in mind, focusing on their symptoms, not the diagnosis, meaning what is being presented in front of you, regardless if it's substance misuse or brain injury, mental health. Are they struggling with memory? Then let's come up with strategies to figure out how we can help them in that area. And again, adjust your expectations of yourself and of the situation, because not all the time they can follow through. They just don't have the ability to do some of the things that you might be asking them to do. And then, yeah, supporting them through the process, because we can't control the outcome. So it's really just focusing on the process and what you can do in that moment to help them be their best selves and be successful in that moment.
So this is our last slide, which is just a few resources, and maybe some people on this call are actually from a couple of the organizations listed here, but these are some of the key resources that we use. Karen also mentioned, but it's not listed here, about the HELPS screener, which can be used for determining if somebody has, in fact, sustained a brain injury. It asks questions about whether they've hit their head or if they experience some of the more common challenges with memory and things as well, just to determine if the next step might be to make a referral. We have had some interactions with a number of these services and associations as well. I'd like to point out a couple of them. Of course, we had to put Dale Brain Injury Services on there so that you can click on our link and see what services we have to offer. But we've also done some work with the ABI, Ontario Brain Injury Association. A number of our staff have taken some of the brain basics courses at Brock University. And then we've also have several staff who have done some aphasia training for communication strategies for working with people who most often have had a stroke and are experiencing expressive or receptive aphasia.
Oh, I just want to mention the ABI Injustice website up there is a really good resource if you want to hear some resources available for support in justice, as well as they give some stats too. And there's a couple of videos on there that are really helpful to get the individual's perspective as well going through the justice system. So it's a very good resource as well.
Yeah, it actually has two parts. If you haven't accessed, it has two parts where one part of the website is for the person experiencing the brain injury, and the other part of the website is for the justice system or the legal community that's supporting that person. So really good resources there as well. And if none of these turn out to be what you're hoping for, I will just make a plug for our consultation and training services. If you click on the link for Dale's services, we can do individualized consultation and training for specific clients or agencies geared to what you are exactly looking for.
Any questions?
Okay, just to remind you, you could send your questions to the Q&A. But I see a question here. It's in the chat. It's like, how likely can we assume it is that opioid users who have overdosed once or more times have indeed sustained an ABI and hence apply what we've learned today in treatment?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. I could take that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I don't even know that you really need to be sure the person has an acquired brain injury in order to apply the strategies that we talked about. A lot of our strategies can be applied to anybody. We often talk about it being applicable to like developmental services or dementia, Alzheimer's, any population. That being said, overdoses typically mean that the person has been starved of oxygen to their brain, either entirely or partially, and depending on how long they were potentially unconscious, that would also affect the situation. So I would say err on the side of caution and treat it as though it is a brain injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Because there's lack of oxygen, there's a high likelihood that there could be a brain injury because of that, especially when you're looking at multiple overdoses, you're more likely to have see symptoms of a brain injury for sure.
Okay.
Good question.
Now, I see or a comment. I found this webinar very interesting. This is the first time that I'm learning about ABI. So kudos to both of you. One of the things that I liked very much about your presentation, I've got a question, but is that you explained to us what ABI is in a very simple terms. You explained some of the behaviors that go with somebody who's got an ABI, and then you sort of told us what are some of the things that we could do if we come across somebody like that. So I found that to be very interesting. My question is that you spoke about one person, two people, two case studies. The first one you spoke about, it looks like she was involved in the justice system. How did you get involved with her?
That's a good question. So several years ago, I think this has got to be going back about 8 or 9 years ago, we had a temporary program where we were actually going to court once a week here in London, Ontario, and we would have 2 staff that would go to court. And if the court staff, whether it's the lawyer or the judge, if somebody recognized that there was a brain injury there, then they would refer to us in the moment while we were at court. And we were receiving tons of referrals that way. So that is how client A came about. She was actually going through the court process, and we happened to be there, and we were able to get connected with her, and she consented, and we were able to provide support. So that's how she got involved with us.
Mm-hmm.
I see. So you were part of services available right on site, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Now,
Something like
unfortunately, we don't have that anymore because it wasn't lack of funding. It didn't continue. That was just something that we did. But yeah, it wasn't sustainable, unfortunately. So we're not able to do that. So we do really rely on the justice system. If somebody does recognize that there's a brain injury, to make that referral to us, and anyone can refer to us.
Okay. All right. And then the next one, next question is, what are the options re supportive housing for individuals with ABI and significant violence? To date, have not found an organization willing to support, as all indicate risk of violence too high and they are not equipped to manage. It's in the chat.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And there really isn't an answer, unfortunately, because most places don't accept people who have high behaviors. It's going to put their staff or other residents at risk. They tend not to want to take them. And yeah, it's a real problem, and I don't think there is a solution. You could definitely always apply to us as an example, but housing is truly an all-around problem that we struggle with too.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the housing that we have that they could be considered for, we have 24 hours, 7-day a week supervised assisted living, which is like a kind of a locked unit. People do gain access after a period of time of assessment. And then supported independent living as well, but that's also almost 24/7 staffed at this point. But people are a little more free to come and go. And then in terms of other things, we do have a residential transition, which is more of an assessment facility for skill building before they move out on their own.
All right. And then another question, how can we support a person in getting a diagnosis?
It's honestly going through the medical channels if you can get that diagnosis. But for individuals who didn't go, often we have found, like with justice with people who have a brain injury that are in the justice system, typically don't seek out medical attention, so they don't have that record of brain injury. And that is why I think the help screener is good, because it'll highlight that there potentially could be a brain injury. Speaking to medical doctors to say, like, to articulate this is all their cognitive challenges, and there was a history of an accident or a fall or an assault or something.
Brain scanning
Brain
is
scans,
helpful.
but again, they're not always sensitive enough to pick up brain injury. But yeah, unfortunately, it is difficult. But it's talking to that individual's support team, like their medical team, to see what kind of medical verification that you get to indicate brain injury.
Having said that, if it's just seeming impossible to get documentation for brain injury, there's still the possibility of accessing consultation supports. If they're presenting with those behaviors and you believe that they have a brain injury, you can still access consultation supports with Dale.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then in the Q&A, in your experience working with justice-involved individuals, what are some of the common challenges of court-mandated conditions, that is conditions of relief or supervision for individuals with brain injury? And what have been some useful strategies to support these folks in managing their conditions? That's a Q&A.
Yes, so it's a very good question. I found that it's the follow through or the lack of follow through. So attending appointments, going to whether it's probation, following treatment orders, etc. It's the follow through, because their life sometimes is unstable. They don't know where they're at day to day. So it's providing a lot of phone calls, reminders, text messages. But then, Karen, they don't have a phone. Well, it's knocking on doors, it's finding other family members or friends who are willing to help out. Honestly, it is a real challenge. It is a real challenge.
And I don't think there's really a way to completely eliminate the possibility that they're not going to meet those court-mandated conditions.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a couple of clients who have actually gone through court diversion with CMHA Thames Valley, which has been very helpful, because then we can support them to make sure that they're meeting the conditions in addition to that court support worker or court diversion worker.
Yeah.
It takes a village, I guess, to make sure that people are going to be as successful as possible.
Yeah, as many touch points as possible, like Allison saying, the village. So if you know a family member is willing to help out, if you have somebody that can show up and knock on doors, reminder phone calls, input it into, like, if they have a pocket calendar or a schedule that they can use. It's honestly finding and trying out many different tools to see what works. And it might take a variety of different tools over several weeks of practicing to fully get it. Because like I said, learning sometimes is slow, and they don't always learn from their mistakes.
All right. And here is a comment thanking you very much for your presentation. But here's a question. As I am listening, it occurs to me that there are similarities between ABI and PTSD. Can ABI strategies be used for folks with PTSD?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are definitely a lot of similarities. I think that, yeah, like I've said before, that these strategies can be used with literally anybody. I've used them with my own family members.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can employ them even like in the checkout line at the grocery store. Like it can be anywhere. But yeah, that is a really good point, that ABI does have a lot of similarities to other mental health concerns or other disabilities.
All right. And this one is in the chat. What is the best way to reach the team?
As in our team?
I assume that's you, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can go to the daleservices.on.ca website. And if you click on services, it will list services, but there will also be an application for service.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you would find it for consultation and training, or to have the person assessed for other services.
Mm-hmm. And I believe our emails are on the presentation, which I think will be sent out to everyone. I believe it'll be sent out to everyone.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, we are certainly willing to get emails and refer your contact information to anybody who asks us for it. So another question in the chat: are there tools to assess a person's cognitive/executive function that do not require a physician to administer?
Oh, sorry, we're just trying to read the question as you're saying it.
Tools to assess. That's a good question. We don't actually use a standardized tool. We do a lot of our assessment in conversation with clients. We'll meet with them and talk about what their particular day-to-day successes are, what their day-to-day challenges are, and we try to get a more fulsome picture, like what social supports do they have, like informal supports, what formal supports they already have. Those are all part of our initial assessment. Having said that, if you're not looking for an ABI diagnosis, then a physician wouldn't necessarily have to tell you those things.
And we also go based on observation. So again, we're not really terribly concerned about the diagnosis in the sense that we're concerned about the symptoms that you're presenting. Are you experiencing memory challenges? Are you experiencing initiation challenges? Do you have hearing difficulties? You know, are you having difficulty speaking, understanding what I'm saying? Those are the things that we look for, and then we develop strategies based on the symptoms that we see. And then we go from there. So, but yes, we don't, because we're not a medical-based organizations. We don't do like the cognitive and the executive functioning type of assessments.
All right, we have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to go to the chat, the Q&A. I know you discussed different supported independent residential placements offered. However, I'm having trouble reading here. However, are all those you mentioned through DSO waitlisted, or are they mandated through your agency? Does that make? I don't know what DSO means.
Yeah, I think I understand the question.
All right.
We are not a DSO funded organization. Like our beds are not under DSO. So I think what you're asking is if they're waitlisted under DSO, the answer is no. Having said that, our residential and supported housing is waitlisted.
Okay, and what is, for those of us in the legal world, what is DSO?
Developmental Services Ontario.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, I don't see, I mean, there's some, if you look in the comments, and everybody can see the comments, there's some additional comments. In general terms, you're getting the thumbs up for your presentation. I hope we get to see you again. Given the fact that there is a request for your information, with your permission, we can send out your email specifically to the people who attended in case they are interested and want to contact you. But having said that, there's a lot of thumbs up that are coming up. Let me just see one last. Yes, everybody's saying thank you for the presentation. It was fantastic. We thank you so much for giving of your time. And your PowerPoint, if you send it to us, we will certainly make sure that it's circulated. Your presentation will be sent to everybody, but it will also be stored on the Justice Treatment website, so people can look at it anytime they want. We're only able to do the things that we do because of people like you, experts like you, who are prepared to share your time. So with that, thank you very much. So until next time, I guess we will adjourn until next time. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.